Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Family Writing Journey. I'm Michael.
I'm Sunny.
And I'm Matthew.
We're a dad, a mom, and a teenage son. We each recently took up fiction writing. We're definitely not experts, but we hope you'll enjoy hearing about our journey and maybe get inspired to start your own. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Family Writing Journey. Today, we'll be discussing using personal experiences in our writing. So, how our life experiences might affect anything in our writing: settings, characters, events, any kind of details. So, I think I'll bring it first to our young man of lesser experience to see what his opinions are.
Yeah. So some common advice that really relates to this, I think, is write what you know. It's probably a phrase that a lot of writers have heard, or if not that exact phrasing, that idea that you should try and build from your own experience. Take things that you have done or seen or heard about and work them into your story. And this is certainly, I think this is good advice and bad advice. I think it's good to incorporate what you know and what you have experience with, but I think it also, that saying, right, what you know, has the other, like, the shadow idea that you should not write what you don't know, which is an idea that I disagree with.
Yeah, me too. I really disagree with that idea too. But go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's fine. I don't have a whole lot to say about that.
So, where do you think that advice comes from? Why do expert writers suggest that people write what they know?
I don't know. And Matthew and I are both interested in fantasy, so writing what you know doesn't really work on in another planet, on another world. I mean, I know it does for characters and things like that, but I don't know where that comes from.
I think, I mean, it could come just from disgruntled readers who have read something that clearly does not line up with reality of something they have experienced, which I think just means if you're writing something that other people do have experience with and you don't, and it's like a real world thing, not like fantasy and science fiction type stuff generally, then you should do a little bit of research and figure out that you're at least not making horrible errors.
And I guess I would think that the advice comes from a place of encouraging people to bring details into their book that are going to feel real and feel convincing to the reader. So, write what you know doesn't literally mean that you can only write what you know, or you can't write sci fi if you've never, been on a planet in another galaxy. But I think to me anyway, it sort of captures that idea that your writing is going to be more compelling if it has more detail, first of all, and if that detail resonates with people as feeling more real.
Right.
So,
Although that's sort of also just a writing skill. Like, you can make something not real feel real, which is exactly what the fantasy genre is. I mean,
yeah. And the other thing I would think about that advice too is that maybe it's something that helps new writers get started. If you're not really sure what to write and you're having a hard time getting started, that it is a way to sort of break through that initial anxiety about writing. And
that's a good
again,
point. Yeah.
not literally to write your own autobiography because nobody really cares about that usually. At least I don't think any of the three of us would be able to sell
Right.
an autobiography, but again, to not be scared and to start with something that feels more accessible to you. And so, like, I've heard the advice, take something that has really happened to you, but then ask like a follow-up question, or maybe something happened in school that day. Ask yourself, what if instead of the teacher doing X, she did Y? So start with something that's accessible, that's real, and then maybe take it someplace different.
Well, I like what you said about the details. That I hadn't thought about that before. I think you have. But for me, that the details might actually make for better writing. So I alluded to this on the last episode that my sections that were a little more sort of grappling and hand fighting, I have a lot of experience with that in training, not not in the real world. Um, and I'm guessing those were a little bit better because it was just easier to put in a lot of detail of how you shift your weight and how someone turns and where you
Mhm.
grab their arm. And then I have some sword fighting scenes, and I bet they're not as good, and I bet they're shorter because that's all just based on, movies and books and other things that I don't have any real experience with how your arm feels when it gets, when it's holding a sword and gets hit by another one and is blocked, and where you feel the soreness. I just don't know that. I can make some stuff up, and I could probably think about it and put more detail in. But writing what you know does allow that sort of specificity, that sort of deeper dive into what you're talking about. So that's a good thought. I think you're right.
And I guess I would assume that most writers do some amount of research because
I didn't.
except Matthew. Well, I guess I take it back. I don't assume that. And maybe that's not necessary. I know when have been writing, I come across little things that I don't know anything about, and then I just Google them, like what's the name of something, or what does this look like?
Yeah.
And then certainly there are many writers that go really deep with research, but I think you're right. And maybe we should talk for a few minutes about a couple of examples from our own writing where we took something from our experience, and you just gave the example of using your jujitsu background. I guess I would say, if I'm thinking about setting, character, events, I guess I would feel like my own experience has tended to come into my writing mostly with smaller details. So, for example, I have some gardening experience, and I know that that's come into some of my books. And the writing in those sections about gardening is more detailed, not just the specific kinds of plants, but how it feels to try to pull up a rose bush from the roots, and how hard it is to get an old established planting up out of the ground, like things that you could research but not really get the sort of the sensory piece.
And I think those sorts of details are really something that can really improve writing a lot. Like I've noticed, at least with my own writing as a newbie writer, that I'm often lacking for details as I'm just sort of following the plot and getting towards the finish line of the book. And I think all of us could benefit from little details like the ones that you're able to put in about gardening and you rabbits, which you know a little about.
Yeah, I had rabbits in my last book just because I wanted to. Well, so Matthew, for you, what parts of your experience end up in your books?
As a less experienced person who has only lived 17 years of sort of mostly sedentary homebound life, I have less experiences to build on, I feel like, which I guess sort of would have made fantasy a natural place for writing because I don't have to have knowledge or experience of the real world because I can make up a new world.
And you have experience of other things you've read.
Right, and that's certainly a part of it too.
What about character? Do you think you've based any of your characters on anyone you know, even like a little bit with appearance or mannerism or?
Yeah, that is certainly one thing that I have drawn a bit from. I mean, there's no like direct parallels between people I know and people in my books, but certain character traits
Isn't that like
and
a disclaimer?
appearances and yeah.
This does not. I forget the phrase, but there's a little saying at the ends of things.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but I find not so much that I draw on specific people, but because I've lived 50 years and been in various situations in, over time, sometimes it just comes a little more naturally to think about how somebody might react in a certain situation. So, for example, I had a scene in a book where somebody, sort of a workplace kind of scene, where somebody was experiencing like a really sort of overwhelming amount of paperwork and bureaucracy. And I didn't connect that character to anyone in particular, but I thought, yeah, I've seen overwhelming amounts of paperwork and bureaucracy, and I've seen people deal with those kind of situations. So like some of the frustration or the reactions, again, I didn't consciously think about it, but I think on some level you're thinking about characters and how they react to certain things is drawn from things that you've seen.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. It's hard to know if you're doing it consciously, though. I mean, I guess you were in that example, but I imagine that we just sort of put things in there from our experiences to some extent. But, I also would hate to have anyone, read what I've written and think it might be based on some experience or even thoughts, because some of my characters and some of the relationship stuff that, that's not indicative of who I am. But I guess it is.
Have you
stuff
ever
that
had
I've
a
seen.
character that you did model on somebody?
No,
I won't ask
not
you who
yet.
it is if that
No,
or started.
no, not in the least yet. But, again, I haven't written enough maybe to start
Right.
doing that. I have heard people that, they're out and they're somewhere and you sort of see somebody and you just get this vague impression of them and you watch them for a minute and you think, oh, I can make a character off them. And even just on appearance, and you can use that appearance in your book, but then, turn them into either a good guy or a bad guy or woman based on just pure fiction and, what's in your head. I don't know.
And I feel like this whole like sort of unconsciously pulling on your experience is sort of worrying for me and probably other younger writers too. Like I just it sometimes feels like my writing just can't be as nuanced or detailed in certain ways based on my own lack of life experiences, which I don't really fully believe, but I think that's certainly something that could come into play.
I don't believe it either, except for what Mom mentioned or what Sonny mentioned about details. You will have some bit less of them, but other things. I mean, you've had many years of thoughts and ideas and meeting people, so I don't think you're too limited there. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I guess I feel like I'd be remiss if I know we're not going to go in this direction, but there is lots of really interesting sort of thought and discussion that relates to authors' abilities to present the experience of people who are not like themselves. And so I know we're not going there in this conversation, maybe in a future conversation, but I do think it's good to acknowledge that we all are who we are, and even whether you're 17 or 50 or 150, you're writing from your experience to some extent. I mean, the characters and the things you come up with, they come from someplace, Matthew. So
Right, right.
I rebel against that too, though. I don't really. I recognize what you're saying.
right, and it's contentious, and again, I'm not trying to open a Pandora's box here, because certainly I hear you want to be able to represent experiences that are not your own, and that come out of experiences that are not your own experience.
Because otherwise, our books, everyone's books, anyone's books would be either dull or
Right,
autobiographical.
and artists obviously in all genres
Yeah.
across the thousands of years have always done that to some extent. But it's a good conversation about where your ideas come from, and then how they influence your writing. We talked a little bit about characters, just a little bit in detail. Anything that either of you guys want to say about setting and how your experience with setting has come into play with your books?
Definitely. That I would say that I probably put myself in a bit of a hole here, because my setting for my first book is sort of a desert-like setting, which I have not been in, not experienced in any way. And thinking about it, it has been hard to add details because of my lack of knowledge of the setting. I can't just say it's hot and sandy and gritty. I don't really know the feel of that so much. So I think that in future books, I'm going to have some cold settings, because I really know those really well. I know
Yeah.
what it's like for my own hands to go numb and lose feeling and sensation, and how you have to bundle and whatnot. And, being out in the desert for extended periods of time.
How your eyelashes can actually freeze shut.
Yes, that did happen to me.
That's happened to you. Matthew, you want to share? I know you said you had a cool idea about
Oh, I was going to say that
setting.
actually.
Yeah.
This is obviously a dream, really, not something that's very likely for any of us. But I had the idea where when you're writing different sections of a book or writing different books that are based in different settings, you could move, like in real life, in the real world, move to places that match your setting. If you're writing a section that's based in a very cold area, you can move to like Siberia. If you're writing a desert, move to the Sahara for a couple of months while you write those scenes.
That's awesome.
And I feel like that would be awesome, right?
Yeah.
Like you can just incorporate those elements as you live there, and you're sort of in the atmosphere, even if it's all very unconscious. I think that would affect you positively.
I
So do you think, so obviously like the details of what it feels like to have your eyelids freeze closed or whatever, but do you think there'd be even something more, I don't know, kind of abstract, like just what you would write in in the context
I
differently?
I think so. I mean, maybe not in every situation or for every person, but I think certainly just the ambiance of a different place could affect your writing in a way that makes it seem more nuanced and more realistic maybe.
So did you ever consider just doing that on a small scale? Like if you were instead of writing in your room at your computer, like what if you're writing about a hot place and you went outside where you're like sweaty and the bugs were
Yeah.
biting and
I've thought about it a little bit. I've done like tiny steps towards it, which is like I change the music that I'm listening to based on like
oh,
the intensity of a scene sometimes or the setting of a scene.
Oh, so that goes back to writing habits. I don't remember if we talked about that. You write with music?
I do. I always write with music. Not lyrical music because that would mess me up too much, but just sort of background, generally peaceful stuff. If I'm like at a really climactic section, sometimes I'll switch to something more aggressive that'll sort of make me get into the flow of it more.
So do any of us wish that we had experiences that we don't, that we think would help our writing, or at least our current writing project?
um well, I intentionally set my current writing project in a setting that I'm pretty familiar with. So I actually feel like I intentionally am trying to take advantage um,
Yeah.
of that. But I don't know. I guess I would still say that I think my writing would be better if I knew a wider variety of people. I just think you can never know too many different people in different life circumstance because I just do think that there are things that I can't really fully imagine. So for
Although,
me, I think, and maybe that's because my writing, I do tend to be more character focused. My settings and my worlds are relatively weak, so I guess probably that would be helpful too. But I guess I would say for me, again, just a broader experience of people.
how about you, Matthew?
Um, yeah, I think just in general, I would like more experience. I think for me, setting is the main one. Like, I've lived in sort of the same place all of my life, and I think it would be helpful. I mean, for my growth as a person, but also as a writer, to go to different places and see different things.
Are you angling to go on like vacations and trips? Was that what was this whole
I
podcast
mean,
idea just a big plan
if
to
it would help my writing, it just seems
Oh, right, right. Yes, if we
it's
cared.
not for my own enjoyment, you know.
Whose idea was this topic?
Well,
Go ahead.
yeah, I would certainly, with my current book at least, I feel like I put myself in a tough spot by having it be more of a desert world. So I wish I did have that experience. I think that would help and sort of worm its way into my writing in some way.
I wonder what writers do, more experienced writers or more successful writers, because like you hear about actors who are going to play a certain part that they're not familiar with. They might spend, weeks either with a person who has that experience or in a certain setting so that they can really get the feel of
I
it.
think I
Do writers
know,
do that?
yeah, they do. At least, those with some coin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that Brandon Sanderson, who is a popular fantasy author, he was once writing a character who didn't have the use of their legs anymore. And he talked about his research being more of like in-person stuff. Like he talked to people with disabilities similar to that and like their experiences helped inform his writing choices.
So as a physical therapist, I should start throwing in some more of that kind of stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, you do have a whole
Right.
knowledge base that
Yeah, I didn't use any of that
that would be unique.
so
Well,
far.
that's cool. And he's obviously a great writer and quite prolific, but he finds the time to.
Yeah, which I don't know if how much of that is like if he always did that or now that he has a lot more money and resources and more of an audience who will keep him to account for his mistakes, that is a recent development for him.
Mhm. Yeah, I wonder how much of an issue that is because certainly it seems like nowadays the audience for almost every book is more involved, more engaged, and has more mechanisms for giving author feedback. So I wonder if that does make authors feel a little bit more committed to trying to get it right a little bit more.
I found that you can just cheat. So in my world, I had these desert ponies, and then I started to realize that they would have to, and I did like a little bit of research, and they would have to drink so much. I mean, they would have to carry with them. That would mostly be what they could carry in the wagons. So I just changed it. I just made it into a made up desert pack animal, and I gave it a special name, and thereby solved the problem of having to do any research.
So nobody could say, how would the ponies
Yeah, right.
get
Oh,
enough
no,
water?
this would never work. I can't have
Yeah.
that complaint because, in my world, they're like camels apparently, and they can drink when they have the opportunity and go a long time without. So it's the beauty of that genre.
Yeah, fantasy really is a great genre in a lot of regards.
So I don't need experience when I can just make things up.
That's exactly, yeah.
So the last thing that we thought we might talk a little bit about today is research, and I think we've kind of touched on that. Maybe we'll come back to it on another episode if there's some more interest. But I do think it's interesting that there's kind of the balance between the experience that you bring as a writer and then the experience, although secondhand, that you can gain through research, whether it's like talking to somebody that has a certain experience or just the research that you do online.
Well, and also I feel like reading itself sort of counts as both research and experience, because you're gaining in a secondhand manner the experiences of other people and getting a more developed idea that can help with your own writing.
So, do either of you, before we say goodbye, with your current projects, have any plans to actually kind of do any of the things we've talked about today in terms of, whether it's research or talking to somebody or taking a trip to Siberia so you can write in the cold?
Maybe for future projects, but
Okay.
probably not anymore for this current one.
Nothing immediate.
Not specifically, but just in general.
Yeah.
And the one I just want to throw in one last thing. I know we're getting close. I think that people's experiences are super valuable, whatever they are. So if you're a kid, if you're 15 and you have like a relationship, like a romantic relationship, that's just as real and just as powerful and just as strong. And it might seem not so to an adult, but it's to you, the emotional parts of that are a full-on experience. So I don't want to minimize young writers, and I just made that up. I don't want anyone to think that Matthew's had any weird relationships. He has not. Or maybe he has. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just think people's experiences shouldn't be minimized, no matter what their age are. And you might not have the life experiences of knowing a lot of people and having a lot of places you've been, but anybody who's young and writing, their experiences are just as emotionally powerful, and that's what really matters in your writing, I think. Whether you can convey it or not, I guess it depends on the type of writing. But anyway, just wanted to make that last
that
point.
Makes a lot of sense.
All right. Anything else? I think we're all set. So thanks again for joining us, and good luck with your own writing journey.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.